So we're on our way to the airport. We're late. Our driver didn't show up this morning, which is amazing. So we had to scramble to get a last minute taxi and hope that we make it in time. We've got like half an hour until boarding. We're on our way to Ataturk Airport. We're in Istanbul, which is where we live, and hopefully we can make this plane. This is Mustafa. Say what's up, Musti.
Good morning, everyone.
He is our genius cameraman and director, and yeah, I'm excited. So we made it onto the flight just in time as well. It's 7:20 in the morning on a lovely Friday morning, and we are heading to Bodrum, which is in southwestern Turkey. And it's a beautiful place, but it has a really sad history, and that's the reason that we're there. And yeah, fingers crossed. Pray for us that we land safely. And we finally made it to Bodrum. Okay, so why are we here? So usually on the show, what we try and do is take a topic that everybody's talking about and dissect it. But what we're doing in this episode is the opposite. We're taking something that was a buzz a while ago that everyone seems to have forgotten about. And that's the topic of refugees. In particular, the refugees that are drowning in this body of water, the Mediterranean. And while Bodrum is a beautiful place, it's a tourist destination, about 2 years ago, this was the only lifeline for refugees trying to go from Syria into Europe. And that was highlighted tragically with the story of Alan Kurdi, a 2-year-old Kurdish refugee who made headlines around the world when the image of his body was shared to Twitter and then went viral.
3-year-old Alan Kurdi has become a heartbreaking symbol of a crisis.
In Britain, the outcry over the harrowing pictures of Alan Kurdi have forced the government to change its stance on Syrian refugees.
We must respond as human beings. We simply cannot walk by.
Well, I think that image, it's something that people can't ignore.
The whole world seemed to come to a standstill that day and promised they were going to do more to help out refugees in the worst refugee crisis since World War II. But that was 2 years ago. And what actually happened? This is Buzz. Let's go. For 48 hours, that picture of Alan's final moments were everywhere across the globe. But what isn't as known is the story behind Alan's death and the death of 2 of his family members. I'm gonna go visit the coastline soon of where all this took place. But before that, I wanted to talk about the bigger issue. It's been 2 years and a lot has happened since then. Let's take a moment to remember the political climate that existed around refugees right before Alan died. It was 2015. Governments all across Europe were lining up to say that they are not going to tolerate people coming into their country so-called illegally. The term migrants was being used instead of refugees or instead of asylum seekers, and really harsh images from places like the Austrian border where refugees were being attacked, arrested, chased by police, and other stories coming out of Germany where refugees were falsely accused of committing rape, of committing other violent attacks. The atmosphere was really charged, and not a lot of countries were willing to accommodate the influx of refugees that was coming from Syria and from Afghanistan and a number of other countries. And then the image of Alan's body lying helpless on a beach here in Bodrum shocked the world. Within hours of it, countries like the UK and Germany were stepping up to saying they were going to increase their intake of refugees. The European Union held an emergency summit and said they were going to provide financial aid to countries like Italy and Greece, where most of the arrivals were taking place. It seemed, at least for a moment, that something was going to change fundamentally in how the world looked at refugees and the refugee crisis and how they were going to treat these people. But now it's been 2 years, and it really seems that everything's gone back to the way it was before. Last year, the EU signed a controversial deal with Turkey, where the EU was going to provide Turkey with €6 billion in aid, as well as easing visa restrictions. Reopening talks about allowing Turkey to come into the EU. In exchange for that, Turkey had to not only stop Syrian refugees from trying to get to Greece from its shores, but also taking back some of the refugees that had already made it to Greece. At the same time, a lot of the countries in the Balkans were starting to take things into their own hands. Countries like Hungary, Austria, Slovenia, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Norway started building fences and walls around their borders to make sure nobody was coming across from Greece. This did stem the flow of Syrian refugees who had nowhere else to go but stay in Turkey or cross into neighboring countries like Jordan. But for hundreds of thousands of other refugees, refugees that were fleeing for their lives, it meant they had to take a much more dangerous route. And instead of trying to cross a short distance from Turkey to Greece, they were now trying to cross from Libya to Italy. But the most important thing to remember is that Alan's story is not unique by any means. He was a symbol for the overwhelming number of people that were drowning every single year in the Mediterranean trying to flee. The year that he died in 2015, 3,600 people drowned, many of whom were taking the exact same path that he was on. Over the last 4 years, 15,000 refugees have died trying to cross the Mediterranean. 15,000. Another 10,000 have gone missing. This year alone, at least 2,500 people have drowned, proving the European Union's harsh policies in trying to deter refugees are not working. This year, for example, over 120,000 refugees have made their way to Europe. And they're not just coming from Syria, they're coming from Afghanistan, they're coming from Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, Morocco, Central Africa. But of those 120,000, 100,000 have come from Libya to Italy by boat. And of 13,700 children that have made their way to Italy through that same route, 92% of them were all on their own. It's estimated that around 10,000 children are homeless or living on the streets or unaccompanied all throughout Europe. These were children that either got separated from their families or their families were killed and are now having to fend for themselves. And that, by the way, is a very conservative number. These are 10,000 children that we know are missing. There are many, many more that we don't know. But all of this hasn't stopped European leaders from trying to take credit for what they say is stronger refugee policies. The European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker this year boasted about the reduction in loss of life. And while by numbers it's true, the numbers going to Italy from Libya have almost halved, it's not that simple. For one thing, it's become a lot more dangerous to cross the Mediterranean, with smugglers cutting costs, using rubber dinghies instead of boats, and stopping refugees from taking on too much water on board. Even though there's less people that have drowned this year, that number makes up 1 in 50 refugees that try to cross, compared to 1 in 90 last year. So you're almost twice as likely to die trying to cross the Mediterranean as you were last year. The other huge problem with European refugee policies is that in April this year, the EU signed another refugee deal, this time with Libya, to try and stop refugees from crossing there. This $215 million deal with the Libyan government, by the way, there is no Libyan government, that asked Libyan authorities to stop refugees from crossing and resettle them elsewhere. This was followed up by a number of reports saying that an enormous amount of refugees are being exposed to sexual abuse, to human trafficking, to exploitation, lengthy prison sentences. A large part of the global slave trade today is centered around African migrants in Libya. All of this while there's literally a civil war happening in Libya. Human Rights Watch says the more refugees that are stopped from crossing into Europe, the more that are left at the mercy of smugglers and sex traffickers in Libya. So it's been 2 years after the world was shaken to its core with the images of Alan Kurdi's death. And what's really changed? So right now we're driving north of Bodrum to Akyalar, and the spot where Alan Kurdi's body was found. And it's also the closest geographical spot between Turkey and Greece from this area, and it's where a lot of refugees had traveled along with the smugglers to try and cross into Greece and seek asylum and get into Europe.
I know the exact location.
Really?
Yeah.
So we finally made it to the beach. Took us a while, but we found the spot where Alan Kurdi and his mother and his brother were found on the 2nd of September 2015. There's definitely an eeriness here. It would have been very early in the morning, maybe 2 or 3, and a truck would have arrived in the pitch of night carrying a large number of refugees. There were 12 people on the boat. They were trying to cross to Greece. You can see it there on the horizon, the island of Kos, and this is the closest point to that island. You can imagine just how desperate these families were to cross. The smugglers would have rushed them onto the boat. We know that Alan's father was handed a paddle and told to row. And that's it. And they were pushed out into the sea. And not long after they left this shore, they capsized. The boat capsized and everybody fell overboard. Some of them thankfully were able to make it back to this shore alive, but some of them couldn't. And of the people whose bodies ended up on the shore were Alan, his mother, and his brother. I know they're not buried here, but I feel like I should still recite the opening verse of the Quran, which is what we usually do for the dead. So I'll do that now. So one of the reasons that we're here today, apart from making this video, is that we want to film a poem about Alan and about refugees. It's a poem that I wrote 2 years ago, immediately after his death. So it's the second day of shooting. We're about to head off back to the beach. This is the call to prayer that you can hear right now. It is 6:30. Let's go. Oh my God, okay. So we've just finished filming, and I'm completely soaked in water. So is this guy. We're gonna be putting together this poetry video, and it'll come out at the same time as this video. So please go do check it out and leave your thoughts and tell us what you think, and hopefully share it and share the message about refugees and the story of Alan Kurdi, and let his story also be a message for us to not forget those who are drowning now and those who aren't drowning but need desperate help. And hopefully things around the world will change the way they did momentarily 2 years ago. And oh my God, I'm so cold. Yeah, this was Buzz. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go get some dry clothes and some food and some like hot coffee. All right.